Welcome to BYOB. Now is the time to build your own business and push your brand forward. Join us each week for fresh, innovative strategies to bring your brand and business to new heights. Call in at 888-994-4995, Studio B. Now let's get to the show.
Good morning and happy Friday, everybody. Welcome to this episode of BYOB, Build Your Own Brand. I'm Nancy Berger and I'm hosting the show today. I'm so happy to be here. I'm going to be sharing with you 5 steps to having difficult conversations. So we're going to talk about some interesting stuff and learn some new strategies. I would call myself a fear strategist, which is kind of a strange title maybe for some of you. It's not something you go to school for, but I'll give you a little bit of my background in a minute. But first, what I'd like to do is invite everybody to kind of just center themselves and take a breath. And I would like you to think about maybe a recent difficult conversation that you had, or maybe not so recent, but one that you remember that was particularly uncomfortable or left you feeling not so good. And I'd like you to think about, maybe remember some of the details of that if you could. Even jot them down. Take a minute and jot some of them down. Maybe things other people said that upset you. Maybe something you said that you kind of regretted saying. Or maybe how you felt in your body when you were in the middle of that exchange. And this will help us as we move through the show today, and as I teach you some of these strategies, it will give you context if you can kind of have some reminders about conversations that you've had that didn't go so well. And if you can't remember any of that, that's fine. Just maybe think about maybe one that you're considering getting into with somebody, or something that you're avoiding, a topic that you're avoiding. I just want you to kind of raise your awareness and get some sort of touch points in your brain about difficult talks or chats that you've had or are expecting to have. So while you're doing that, I'm going to give you a little bit of backstory about who I am and why I do this. Again, my name is Nancy Berger. I've been a writer for 25 years. But in the last 10 or 12 years, I've focused my work and my research a little bit around fear. And over that past decade, it's gotten more and more interesting and fascinating to me. And I've really dedicated myself to it exclusively in the last 2. And what I am interested in is how we navigate fear in our lives, how it manifests in different areas of our lives, and how, when we understand it, we can release it better. I'm not a believer in the let's be fearless thesis. I'm not a believer that is sustainable. And I think that to build a path towards courageous living, we have to understand our fears and kind of dig in and sort of deconstruct them. So let me tell you a little bit about my story. So I think everybody has a fear story. That I talk about our fear journey or our fear story, that we all have sort of these times in our lives that are formative, informative, and kind of define who we are and how we manage situations. And so, since I can't kind of draw you a picture now, I like to sort of use an infographic when I talk to audiences and sort of say, look at this picture and these are the bullet points of my fear journey. But I'm just going to go through it really quickly so you have some idea of what brought me here and why I'm so passionate about this work. So when I was I basically spent 30 years being afraid of a lot of things. Started when I was 15 years old. So again, going back to early days. Developed an eating disorder, struggled with body image, struggled with mood swings that in the 70s people didn't really talk about too much, right? So I internalized that and tried to navigate on my own. Got into my 20s, went to college, graduated, really had an urge and a passion for creative arts, music, theater, but I also had an aptitude for finance and math. So my family, my first family, strongly discouraged me from going into the creative arts because that wasn't considered a secure livelihood. And I was encouraged to go into finance, which I did. Again, a dissonance. I wasn't really aligned with my passion and my heart's, desire. 28, I got married. And like a lot of us do, we think that these major life events, while they're beautiful and feel great, we think sometimes that they're going to fix everything else, which they never really do. But I was in love and I was, pouring myself into that new chapter of my life. By 33, I had my first child, our son. And mood swings, as many of us are aware, sort of get exacerbated with childbirth, and that's what happened to me. So I finally realized that I did need some help, and it was a little more acceptable then to me and seemingly to society. So I did start therapy and start working on some of my issues. But at the same time, we found out that our son had some special needs and neurological issues that were going to manifest in learning and social interactions and stuff. So there was more piling on. Had our daughter 2 years later, and I threw myself into parenting to try to do the best I could, kind of ignoring my own issues, right? When I was 42, I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. So in a way, it was a relief because I understood what was making me tick and why I was feeling so bad so much at the time. But that started a new journey of trying to get the right help and the right medication, which I didn't at first, and ended up in a 2-year manic episode that was extremely destructive and culminated in my nearly getting arrested for a DUI. Nearly was the operative word there. So that was the pivotal point for me where I realized things had to change, the train had to get back on the tracks, and I was the one that was responsible for that. So I started to do things a little bit differently. And in my early 50s, about 10 years after that, I had done enough work to understand how fear was manifesting in my life. And then I started cultivating strategies to change that. And those are some of the strategies I'm going to share with you today. So that brings me to the show, which I'm just so excited to be sharing and be present with you guys today. So now that you know my story, you know that I've had my share of difficult conversations, right? We all have. And you can imagine that over those years, I probably experimented with a lot of different things, which I did. But the good news is I've developed strategies for many different interactions and many different thought processes, and they work. So these strategies I'm going to teach you today, 5 steps to having a difficult conversation, these work. They have helped me feel grounded. They have helped me feel confident. And I think most importantly, they've helped me feel good in my skin. So I walk away from conversations that are not always comfortable, but I walk away feeling comfortable that I showed up in the best way I could, that served me and served the other person. So we're going to get started. Now, one thing I want to make sure you understand is that I'm going to be giving you quite a bit of information. And with each step, I'm going to talk about some exercises, some practice that you can use to try to get muscle memory on these strategies. However, again, a lot of information. Don't feel like you're going to have to remember it all. And don't feel like you have to take copious notes or write things down, because that will distract you a little bit. And know that at the end of the show, I'm going to tell you how to download a guide, an ebook that's 15 pages and has all these strategies that I'm going to share with you, and in more detail even than I'm able to share with you today. So you can relax and just sort of listen and be present to the discussion today, and know that at the end, I'll tell you how to download the free guide so you can have it and you can, sort of have the practice exercises. Okay, so let's get started. 5 steps to having difficult conversations. Step 1 is called unpack the fear. Now, what does that mean? So you might think, well, what is she talking about? Of course, if we don't want to have a conversation, we're afraid to have the conversation because we don't want to maybe tick somebody off. And that's true maybe all of the time. But there's also other layers to that fear. And it's really important to be able to identify the what. What is it that I'm afraid of? It may not be as obvious as you think. Is it, I don't want to rock the boat? You're at work. You don't want people to think you're difficult. In a relationship, I don't want to make them mad at me or break up with me. I don't want to be thought of as difficult. I don't want my child to shut down and not communicate with me. So there's many different whats, but it's really helpful and important to identify the whats. And then the why. Why am I afraid of that? It's not always obvious. So it could be imprinting from your first family dynamics, what you were taught as a child, how you were modeled, how life and conversations were modeled for you. It could be past relationships or even recent relationships. But there's a why with every what. And those two things really help us understand what our fears are based on, and also help us take a look at what we can control and what we can't control. So think about it. You can't control what anybody else does. You can't control how things were modeled for you as a child. But you can control how you think about things now and how those thoughts manifest into behaviors, right? So the exercise that I like to do in my workshops and when I work with clients is to have them list possible reactions, either in a conversation they had or one that they're sort of anticipating. List possible reactions and some of the fears that they trigger, and then identify which of those you can control versus which you can't. It's kind of eye-opening. Okay, let's go to step 2. Fear fact versus fear fiction. So, we as humans are hardwired to make stories, and we make stories all day, every day. Just let's do a quick example. You're standing in the grocery store on the checkout line, and somebody in front of you is doing something that's irking you. Fill in the blank, whatever it is. We make a story about that. We say, oh, they must be. None of that is based on fact. And we do it all the time. It's just the way we are hardwired. And neuroscientists like to call it cognitive bias. And that means that we make these stories, we create narratives, and then we look around for evidence to support what we've created. We do it by, befriending people that have similar views, or we do it by just saying, oh, well, they did that, so it must mean this. This is just how we are as humans. This is not something that we can really change. However, we can change how we connect dots, right, in conversations. So think about how many times you say to somebody, well, you said this because, or you say, well, you think this, or you're trying to do this. That's us making stories and convincing ourselves that they're true. So when we're in conversations that are uncomfortable, it's really, really essential to separate fact from fiction. Stay in the facts. Stick to the facts. What are the facts? What did they actually say? What did they actually do? Keep your narratives out of it. And it's not as easy as it sounds. The exercise here is, you can probably predict what it is. I ask people to make 2 columns, basically. One fiction, one fact. And either in a conversation you had or one you're anticipating, write down what some of the facts are. And then write down what some of the fiction might be. And I can almost guarantee you the fiction column is going to be a longer list. Okay. Number 3, do your job. What do I mean by do your job? Well, stay in your lane. If you're having a conversation, if you're talking to somebody about a heated topic or something that's really controversial, either between you or, social issue or something that's bigger than all of us, we like to sort of project, like, what other people are thinking and how other people are reacting, which is really not our job. If you stay in the I, if you do your job in the exchange, and you speak your experience, then you're expressing rather than predicting what the other person is saying and kind of reacting, right? It's very different. So imagine talking to somebody and getting maybe riled up a little bit. How many times do you say, I felt hurt when you blank? I felt uncomfortable when you. If you think about it and you're honest with yourself, as I have been over the years, I would tend to start sentences with, will you did this, well, you said this, well, you made me feel this. If we stay in the I and we stay in expressing our own experience, it's much more powerful and respectful, and it makes for a much more productive conversation. But the going to the you is usually fear-based on past experiences we've had where we felt victimized or we felt misunderstood. So keep it in expression and stay away from reaction. That's what doing your job means. And the exercise that you can do to sort of get muscle memory on this is to write down I statements. And even if it's not related to a conversation you've actually had with somebody, think about things that are trigger points for you, flash points when you're talking to somebody. Write down the I statements. This makes me feel. I don't like blank. And notice if it's hard for you to do that. It doesn't really come as naturally as we would like it to, I think, much of the time. And, make up situations or scenarios if necessary to try to get used to that habit. Okay, now we're on number 4. Step 4, don't be sorry. What a concept. What a concept. We're in, our society is suffering from an apology epidemic. I'm convinced of it. And my research supports it, and my eavesdropping supports it, which I'm not proud to say I do whenever I can be at a restaurant. People apologize all the time. And not necessarily in situations where they need to apologize. And this is supported by research. In 2010, a study was done that showed that women apologize more than men, that people apologize a lot, but women apologize more than men because they think they should, not because they do more things that require apology. That's kind of a fascinating finding. So when you're contemplating pushback or something that's awkward as far as, a conversation with somebody, and you feel this urge to, express yourself and then say, oh, I'm sorry if that made you feel bad. I'd like you to check yourself by asking yourself these 3 questions anytime you want to apologize. 1, am I doing or saying something offensive that requires an apology? If the answer is no, then you don't need to apologize. Number 2 is, am I entitled to my feelings? Now, this is an easy one because the answer is 100% yes, all the time. You are entitled to every feeling and thought you have, and there are no wrong thoughts or feelings. There are only wrong behaviors. And the third thing is, am I expressing my view with kindness, respect, and compassion? Because expressing a view doesn't require an apology unless there's another piece to it. So if you are expressing yourself in a way that's measured and respectful, don't apologize for it. It diffuses your expression. It diffuses the power of your statement. And if you're still met with hostility when you do it this way, this is not your issue, right? So the exercise that we do for this is a fun one, and it gets a lot of reaction. Notice how many times a day you apologize. Phone calls, interactions in stores, out in the world. How many times I'd like you to just raise your awareness and sort of, so your ear picks it up, and keep like a back of the envelope count of it. How many times a day did I have to do it every time? You might be surprised with what you find. Okay. Step 5, last step. Say it, then wait. So this is about silence. and our discomfort with silence. Not everybody is uncomfortable with silence, but by and large, I think that most of us are. And particularly if we're kind of in the thick of a, awkward exchange with somebody. Do we like silence? No. And do we try to fill it? Often, yes. So, but silence is essential for so many reasons. I mean, studies show that it's good for brain health. So science tells us that silence is good. But in conversations and in exchanges with people, it's also a sign of respect, a sign of trust, a sign of that validation and acknowledgement of what that person is saying. So, silence gives us a chance to process information and solve problems and collect our thoughts. But so then why do we so often knee-jerk to fill it? So step 5 is all about respecting what the other person is saying and encouraging them to respect what you're saying by honoring your statements and punctuating them with a bit of silence. Over talking, interruption, yikes. It's just not a great way to have any conversation, much less a prickly one. So express your view respectfully and then let it take up space. Give it a minute, give it 30 seconds and resist the urge to jump in and say something to kind of, build a bridge for the other person. And likewise, when they're speaking, let it rest for a minute. Look at them face to face. Just sit in silence. If they interrupt you, then it's okay to say, I really want to hear what you have to say, but I'm not quite finished. So please let me finish, and then I'd love to hear your response. So again, these are things that take practice. They just don't come naturally to a lot of us. We just get defensive if somebody's, over talking, or but these strategies can kind of diffuse a situation and lead it down a much more productive path. So the exercise that we do for this one is a fun one. Notice how much silence you endure in a day. And I don't mean silence because you're looking down at your phone, or, I mean real silence. Like, how often is the TV on in the background? How often do you have music playing? And these are not bad things. It's just interesting to raise your awareness about your habits that you might just do automatically and just not really even notice that you're doing. Silence, golden? Well, I don't know, but it certainly is a good tool and a good gauge to see sort of how you show up in your world and in your exchanges with other people. So those are the 5 steps. Let's review them quickly. Unpack the fear, right? What's your what? What's your why? Separate fact from fiction. Do your job. Stay in your lane. Stay in the I. Stay away from the you. Don't be sorry. That's a tough one. Say it, then wait. Those are the 5 steps. Now again, as I told you, there's a lot there. There's kind of a lot to process. And it can take time. Again, these are things that I've worked on for years. It's not automatic, but I think you will find that if you use these, you'll feel better. You'll feel better about how you show up in these conversations. We can't predict how other people are going to feel, but this is a roadmap that's pretty tried and true for me, and I think it will be for you. Now, as I said, so if you go to my website, it'll be on the screen, www.nancyrberger.com, and you go to the resources page and scroll down, you will see this download there. It's called Voice Up, Your Guide to Having Difficult Conversations. You can download it free there. It's a 15-page ebook, and there's more detail in it than I was able to give you here. Even some, sample conversations, like dialogue that you can see. So I think it will be really helpful and a great sort of adjunct to this show today. So go ahead and download it. And while you're there, poke around and look at my articles, look at my events, upcoming events. You can subscribe to my free newsletter there, and or just email me directly if you want to work with me one-on-one. And also, this is a different sort of format because I'm not seeing your faces and I'm not interacting with you in real time, but please feel free to share comments. If you're watching on YouTube or watching on the Facebook page, share your comments. I will respond to you. And I'm anxious to know if any of this resonated, if there's questions, if you're unclear on anything. But I'd love to hear, and I'd also love to hear what your experience is and if these could be helpful to you and if you try them, if they're effective. So before we close, I just want to ask everybody to take a few seconds and just, as we did in the beginning, think about maybe a conversation you recently had that was uncomfortable. And think about what we talked about today and how these strategies might have played a role in that exchange for you. Even if it was a long time ago and you can't really remember the details, if you can remember how you felt in your body, and then in listening to these strategies today, think about how that might have helped reduce some of your suffering in that moment. That's the whole point of this. So I'm so glad that we had this time to go through these strategies today. And I hope they make some of your future conversations a little more smooth running. Again, you can find me at www.nancyrberger.com. If you want to email me directly and without going to the site, you can do that by emailing me at explore@nancyrberger.com. So thank you for joining me today on this episode of BYOB. Maybe we'll call it Build Your Own Bridge. I hope to see you again. And until next time, again, Nancy Berger here, and wishing you a path to courageous living. Thanks again. Bye-bye.
Thank you for tuning in to BYOB. Join us next time for a fresh perspective and innovative strategies to building your own business. If you are a successful business owner with tips to help or would like more information from our hosts or guests, please contact us at 866-224-5422. See you next time.